Coming up, consumers are under extreme financial pressure following yet another interest rate hike. Cholera claims lives in Gauteng and Free State. The queen of rock and roll, Tina Turner, dies at her home in Zurich, Switzerland at the age of 83. A very good afternoon if you've just joined us. Coming to you live from our studios in Johannesburg, welcome to Week in Review, the program where we review some of the big stories to come out of the week, what has been making headlines and getting South Africans talking. I'm your host, Asanda Makaka. Consumers are under extreme financial pressure, and no doubt news of another 50 basis points increase in interest rates will send some into panic. This as people's incomes are struggling to keep up with the growing expenses of inflation as well as interest rates. Local banks note that consumers with debt are taking strain in the higher interest rate environment, but they're urging customers not to bury their heads in the sand, but rather communicate with their financial services provider to jointly find solutions. SABC News business reporter Nombumelelo Siziba filed this report.
The financial heat is well and truly on. Interest rates have now risen by 475 basis points since the start of the rate hiking cycle in November 2021 to date. And consumers with a multitude of debts are feeling the pinch.
That's brought a lot of stress to our customers. And that's a result of a couple of things. The first one is obviously it's not just the impact of one product. What I mean by that, if you think about it, the home loan, if you've got a bond, it's going up. Your car installment is going up. Your personal loan is going up. Your school fees are going up as well for your children. So there's quite a lot of pressure that we're seeing from a customer from all fronts as a result of all of these things.
Research around how quickly people's salaries are consumed by their outgoings suggests that many consumers are financially stressed out for most of a given month as they anticipate the next paycheck.
What we're seeing is that since the interest rate hiking cycle started, the consumer is finding it more and more difficult just to manage their day-to-day affairs. How do I know? Well, if you look at Nedbank data and any of our other competitors, we're seeing that on average, it's taking 4 or so days for the average consumer to run out of money that has gone into their bank account as salaries. In other words, debit orders have come in. I pay rent, I pay my car, I buy food, I buy, whatever that I need to buy to survive on a month-by-month basis, and then I don't have money.
Banks recognize this reality and argue that they're not in the business of repossessing houses and cars, that these are last resort measures taken against consumers. They say when consumers feel like they're in the financial wilderness and they're overwhelmed by their payment obligations, it's better to put your hand up and ask for help from the bank, referring to the help that they were able to give households and businesses during the COVID crisis as an example.
We can look at, for example, reducing your installments. We can look at restructuring that debt, and all of those things are absolutely possible if you speak to your bank. But also, most importantly, if you make sure that you keep your payments up to date, then it's easier then to start looking at all these solutions to help you during that difficult period.
Ultimately, the most important thing is for individuals to be proactive about their finances in a bid to stay on top of them and not the other way round. Before getting to the point of shouting for help, there are basic things that consumers can do.
You need, as a consumer, to take stock of your current reality. We know often it is difficult, but just to say, let me actually write down what is coming in and what is going out so that I know where do I have a shortfall. When one does that simple exercise of tracking expenses, it helps in identifying if there is anything possible to cut out of a monthly budget.
The reality for many, though, is that even when doing the maths, the incomes and outgoings just can't add up, as incomes stay relatively static to higher prices for basic items and services. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And to help us unpack this, we're now joined by Dr. Ajwifanele Nemushungwa, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Venda. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us on the Weekend Review. The rand weakened after the announcement of the repo rate increase. Let's unpack that impact of this hike when looking at the rand against the dollar. The rand is forecast to reach the 20 rand mark soon.
So one can say that this hike in interest rate has negative impact not only on the economy in general. So looking at how the rand reacted after the announcement, this is just sending a message to say the market couldn't absorb this in a very good way, to show that even investors are having a negative sentiment as far as this announcement is concerned. Because immediately if after the announcement we find that the rand showed that it has to decline or to depreciate, automatically is sending a message that the market itself is saying we cannot take this anymore. So it simply means that now the sign of the rand declining is showing that now the message that is being absorbed by the international market as far as the announcement is concerned is very negative. And then the decline in the rand simply means that now as the rand weakens, so investors, especially those who want to come and do investment using the rand, so when the rand is so weak, it is not good news, not only to South Africans, even to other investors outside, because a weaker rand simply means that when interest rates are very high, so it may be good news to those maybe who want to come maybe to bet on the rand as a carry trade. But somebody who is an investor may say, especially in the case of bonds, so it is not good news to bondholders when interest rates are high. Automatically, that message that is being depicted by the weak rand is saying that investors couldn't digest this message in a very good way.
And the CPI rate, Doctor, went down on Wednesday. However, the repo rate was increased by 50 basis points. Did this have an impact on the repo rate increase?
Unfortunately, one cannot say that has that had an impact, because if it had an impact, we wouldn't say that 50 basis point increase, because most of us were just forecasting only a 25 basis, which is just a quarter. But to show that already the CPI, though it has decreased, so the Reserve Bank, when they came up with the announcement, they were not necessarily looking at what is happening with inflation, because if it was a matter of inflation, they would have maybe either decided to keep the repo rate maybe at a level of 25 basis points. But taking that rate of 50 basis points is sending a message that we are not looking at what is happening as an internal or an internal shock. So one can say that they are all mainly focusing on external shocks, like the issue that when we look at the international market, especially what is happening in an economy like US, the fact that US continues to increase their interest rate, it sends a stronger message than what is happening locally. So therefore, even if the CPI has decreased, so already the central bank or the Reserve Bank was focusing on the international market rather than focusing on what's happening nationally. That's why the decrease in CPI couldn't send a very strong message to their announcement on Thursday.
And people are being urged to be proactive in consulting their financial advisors, in hopefully finding a way for the banks to talk to them about the debt that they hold, especially now that the interest rates have hiked. Do you think that there's a way the bank can assist the indebted consumer in intervening with this repo rate increase?
I don't think there is much that the Reserve Bank can do, even the financial market. The fact that maybe they can try to sit down and maybe give them advice. Unfortunately, when you have a debt, even if they give you a holiday to say you're not paying for this particular period, so that does not lessen the debt that you have. But at least if maybe the bank can say, though we cannot reduce the interest rate we are charging, if they can try maybe to lengthen the repayment period, I believe it will be something that will be sending a positive message to borrowers. Because for now, if maybe you are paying an installment of 15,000 and you find that it has increased to 16,000. Seeing what is happening, where we're faced with high prices of fuel prices, high energy price. To tell you the honest fact, unless financial institution can be so lenient and allow we borrowers, maybe by just giving us a longer period to make repayment, that's the only option that they have that they can do for now.
And the Reserve Bank says there will be good news in the future. What does it mean by that? Because the consumer is feeling the pinch, and this is the 10th consecutive interest rate hike since the central bank started the hike cycle in November 2021.
The good news may be that if they say in future, because what their strong argument is that by just increasing the repo rate, they're trying to give pressure to price. But unfortunately, that pressure that is given is, especially when you look at the food price, one cannot say that if you increase the repo rate, for example, so you are trying to discourage or to try to put pressure on price. Unfortunately, the price that is increasing is not coming from the demand side. So the only good news that I can believe they are trying to give us, or just to give us hope, is that there's a possibility that now it seems like they have reached the peak of increasing the interest rate. So the possibility is that we may see that maybe earlier or later this year, the repo rate may tend to take a downward trajectory. That is the positive message that I believe they are just giving to the public.
And lastly, Doctor, the governor noted that the increased load shedding keeps putting pressure on inflation. What's your take on that?
I believe, like I said, that unfortunately the problem that we're facing, the inflation that we're facing as the public, it is not coming from the demand side. Because if it was coming from the demand side, the tool that the Reserve Bank is using of increasing the repo rate would have served its purpose. But unfortunately, because it is coming from the other side, which is the supply side, so the load shedding is having a greater impact on the economy. So unless we can solve the problem of load shedding, even if they try to hike the interest rate, so it's like putting petrol on the fire. So meaning that instead of solving the problem will continue. It's like now the Reserve Bank is not really seeing the real problem, because the real problem is not what consumers are doing. But unfortunately, the main problem is load shedding, which the consumers have nothing to do. So I believe load shedding has to be blamed. And on that point, I can say the government should come with a solution as far as load shedding is concerned. Unless or otherwise, if they don't do that, so the problem of having this high level of inflation will continue. And unfortunately, the people who are going to bear the brunt at the end of the day are consumers, especially the poorest.
That's where we leave it. It doesn't rain, but pours for the South African consumer. Dr. Ashwifaneli Nemushungwa Dolibua. She is the senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Venda. Moving on, President Cyril Ramaphosa has finally outlined the roles and functions of the newly formed electricity ministry. Dr. Khosiyenso Ramakgopa is tasked with the generation of more electricity and ensuring security of supply. The presidency says that President Ramaphosa has signed a proclamation setting out Ramakgopa's responsibilities.
The powers entrusted to Ramaphosa are in line with the Electricity Regulation Act. They were previously entrusted to Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe. This pertains to the electricity generation, the types of sources from which electricity must be generated, the determination of the sale of electricity, new generation capacity, and provision for private sector participation, among others. Some powers and functions, however, will remain with Mantashe. Ramaphosa was appointed to oversee all aspects of the electricity crisis response, including the work of the National Energy Crisis Committee.
President Ramaphosa has transferred to the Minister of Electricity all powers and functions contained in Section 34(1) of the Electricity Regulation Act, which were previously entrusted to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy. The President has also transferred to the Minister of Electricity relevant powers and functions set out in Section 34(2) of the Electricity Regulation Act. Section 34 of the Act deals with new generation capacity.
One energy expert, however, believes the powers given to Electricity Minister are relatively limited and more power is still in the hands of the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy.
In terms of the responsibility, the long-term planning of electricity in the country remains with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And the determination of how that will be done still remains with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. The implementation, you can only implement by issuing ministerial determinations, which the NERSA is supposed to concur with. And then you can then start issuing bids. That's with the current Minister of Electricity. However, as I said, right now, as he gets the powers, there are already determinations that have been made before he was given the powers. And so it kind of becomes mute, really, what role he can really play in that regard. Perhaps in future determinations.
This comes as the country is placed on stage 3 and 5 of the rolling blackouts during the weekend, with threats of possible higher stages during the coming winter months. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The Weekend Review continues after this break. Welcome back. The Free State High Court has postponed Dr. Nandipha urgent application to challenge her arrest to Thursday. This is to allow the Home Affairs Department, which is the 6th respondent, to file papers on the matter. The department is expected to file opposing papers by Monday. In papers before the court, Magudumana says on the 6th of April, SAPS officers arrested and abducted her in Tanzania. She claims that on her way back, police blindfolded her. She adds that her detention at Bizama Kate Correctional Center in Kroonstad is unlawful. Magudumana is charged with aiding and abetting an inmate to escape, defeating the ends of justice, arson, fraud, and violating a dead body. Let's now bring in Aphumelele Madlalane, an SABC News reporter who has been tracking the story. Good afternoon, Aphumelele. Thank you so much for being with us on the Weekend Review. It's the end of another week, and one of the stories that made headlines is the bail application of the 5 former G4S employees. Take us through some of the events as they were happening in court.
Well, Asanda, you're right. Just in the beginning of this week, we saw 5 accused in the escape matter appearing in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court. We know that they have been in and out of the court trying to get a bail application. That's when now we saw some submissions by, of course, the NPA as to why are they objecting the bail application. However, we also heard the closing arguments by the defense trying to convince the court that all the accused are eligible to be granted bail. That's when we heard, of course, the legal representative of Sinohe Matwara, who is Kagisho Morori, citing, or rather putting it to court, that his client cannot be denied bail because of now the NPA saying that they continue with the investigations that might take even 2 months, and also arguing that already Sinohe Matwara has been inside for 1 month and 14 days, and it cannot be right that, or rather it's not in the interest of justice that he can be denied bail. We also heard from other legal representatives, Gary Botha, who's representing accused number 8 also, who is Natasha Jansen, whereby he was basically submitting in court that his client, Natasha, there's no proof that has been brought forward by the state in proving that Natasha really had a link in the escape of Tabo Bester. But essentially, we also had the submissions by the prosecutor, whereby he indicated that rather the defense team ignored to entertain the merits that were in their affidavits. However, they just brought forward the circumstantial evidence, or rather the personal circumstances of the accused as to why are they supposed to be released on bail, where they were citing that the accused handed over their passports. As we heard that Sinohe Matwara just last year, he was in and out of Lesotho. That's just one of the issues that were being questioned by the NPA while they were, of course, opposing this bail application, saying that, of course, the accused, they will tamper with the evidence, and also saying that they will pose a threat to the society. As we heard some of the submissions by the investigating officer in this regard, who came as a state witness, said that he saw, while through her investigation, of course, his investigation, he saw how the Bloemfontein Celtic supporters were rather not happy with how this matter is handled, and saying all the accused should not be granted bail, citing that they want to, of course, justice for Katlego, the ring, whose charred body we know was used as a decoy, and also is the body that was used in Sol 35, that of Tabo Bester. So many developments and so many, of course, evidence that was brought to court through the state witness, whereby we heard how are these 5 accused therefore linked to the escape. As we know that they are former G4S employees, all of them had a role prior to May, where Tabo Bester escaped. That's last year. So that's just some of the issues that really came out. Now it remains to be seen, as this matter has been postponed to this coming Monday. We'll have now to hear from the magistrate whether he's convinced enough to release all the accused on bail, and what are the reasons thereof. We knew already that this week there was no way that the judgment on the application of bail was going to be handed down, because he has since indicated that this is a highly profiled case and it involves a lot of accused that are, of course, looking for bail application, and therefore he also needs to be afforded time to go through before he hands down the judgment. Just on Friday, Asanda, we were at the High Court in Bloemfontein, where we know that Nandipha wanted an urgent and her matter to be heard in an urgent basis. But however, it was just short proceedings, whereby we heard from even the legal representative of Dr. Nandipha saying that he has spoken to the parties that is the respondents in this regard. That would be the SABC, the Department of Home Affairs. Also, we know that it's going to rope in as a 6th respondent of the matter. So one of the reasons why this matter was postponed is to allow the respondents to file their papers. That includes the Department of Home Affairs as well as the NPA, to file the papers before on Thursday, whereby now we will hear from the judge, Lopsha, whether he grants this matter to be heard on an urgent basis, because we must remember that it should convince that it should be heard on an urgent basis. That's when now we will hear, of course, the arguments by the legal representative of Dr. Nandipha, but we already saw what she cited in the papers, where she was saying that she's challenging the arrest thereof that occurred in Tanzania, and saying that South African police members did not have authority or jurisdiction to be arresting her in Tanzania, and also questioning the issue that she was blindfolded on her way back to South Africa. And it's just some of the issues that she is basing her urgent application on. And we must remember that she's the one person that didn't exercise her right of trying to apply for bail. However, she has since mentioned that she will exhaust all avenues before she can try to want to be out on bail. But we heard that it was not rather them postponing but suspending the issue of bail application. So these are the developments from her side. We know now why she suspended the bail application.
Aphumelele, What are the families of the accused saying about the case? Because the accused are on the dock, rightly so perhaps, but they do have families who are witnessing all these developments. Have you had a chance to engage with them?
Well, they were clear enough to us to say that they would rather talk to the media after the judgment of the bail application. But we would see them coming to court, especially the father of Tabo Bester and also the family of Natasha Jansen. We would see them in court, listening all the proceedings. Every day they are there, but they made it clear that they want to be talking or interacting with the media until, therefore, around judgment. But we also saw throughout the proceedings that the family of Katlego Bereng is the one that, anyways, has been willing to talk to us and has been talking to us. They're still emotional. They are still questioning on what really happened to Katlego Bereng, and they are still looking for, of course, answers with regard to that matter. But they've also objecting that the accused be out on bail, and we saw that they are being supported by the Action SA as well as the Bloemfontein Celtic supporters, who said they will come to court to stage their protest if needs be, as they were following also the proceedings whereby they heard that the defense in this matter was questioning whether, how many are they, will their voices really be like, will their voices really make them not to be able to be out on bail? Will they pose a threat in the society as accused only because there's just a small individuals or a small number who are saying they shouldn't be out for bail? That's when now they were, of course, confident to say that if needs be, if necessary, they will come in their numbers to stage a protest at the Bloemfontein Magistrate Court in support of Katlego Bereng and saying they want justice for Katlego Bereng, and these accused should remain in custody.
Aphumelele, you actually answered my last question, and I thank you very much for that detailed account of the developments that are happening in Bloemfontein. Aphumelele Mdlalane is our SABC News reporter, and the Weekend Review continues after this break. Welcome back. Political analyst and author Prince Mashele has defended his decision not to acknowledge researcher, political strategist and Action SA member Brutus Malada for work he did for the Herman Mashaba biography titled The Outsider. Mashele says Malada was contracted to do research and there was no agreement on acknowledgement. The author also accused Malada of sharing sensitive and confidential information with his partner, Dr. Mpho Mpalatse, who is a DA member.
Brutus has been my friend for 25 years.
Yes.
Friends turning into enemies.
He has no right to be acknowledged, by the way. There's no contract that says Brutus Malada shall be acknowledged.
Political analyst and author Prince Mashele stating his side of the story.
Here's the thing, I cannot control Brutus. He breached my professional confidence in him, and he decided to embark on a campaign to discredit the book and to discredit me.
The bone of contention, researcher, political strategist and Action SA member Brutus Malada demands to be acknowledged for the work he has done in Action SA leader Herman Mashaba's biography, amongst others.
I took a decision not to acknowledge Brutus. You know why? He had committed a very serious breach, and that's what ended the relationship personally and professionally. I discovered that he took sensitive information that he acquired during the course of the work he was doing for me. He passed over that information to Mpho Mpalatse and a political party that I will not mention. When I discovered that, I called Brutus the following day. Brutus, why have you done this? Why have you breached this confidence? He fought back. And I knew from that moment that was the end of my personal and my professional relationship with him. I decided, therefore, that someone who has breached my confidence, I will never mention him in my book because he's going to compromise it.
Mashele also clarified the amount he charged for the book. It has been confirmed that Mashaba paid 12.5 million to finance the book, but did not have insight into the contents of the book.
By the way, it's a loan agreement. It's not a grant. I still need to repay Herman Mashaba, the loan agreement. So he accepted it. When he accepted it, that's where the 12.5 million comes from. So it was my proposal. It was accepted on the other side. And this is very important because people said 12.5 million. Let me tell you, what you have accepted as your salary here at the SABC was purely on the basis of your negotiations.
During an interview with the SABC on Monday, Malada told the public broadcaster that he is the one who introduced Mashele to Mashaba, a claim Mashele denies. Mashele also says there is no basis to accuse him of being unethical.
No one, by the way, neither the publisher has not said I have been unethical. You will never find anything written by the publisher that says I have been unethical. Herman Mashaba has never said I have been unethical. The only person who said I have been unethical is Brutus. Brutus has no contract with Herman Mashaba. Brutus has no contract with the publisher, Jonathan Ball. So I actually don't know the basis on which he says I have been unethical.
Meanwhile, publishing house Jonathan Ball Publishers has withdrawn the book from the shelves nationally. SABC News, Johannesburg.
The private prosecution bid launched by former President Jacob Zuma against his successor has been postponed to August. This as judgment in President Cyril Ramaphosa's legal challenge of the private prosecution remains reserved.
The Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg has granted a long postponement to former President Jacob Zuma's private prosecution of his successor, President Cyril Ramaphosa.
The draft order marked X is made an order of court.
As it pleases the court, my lord.
Zuma appeared in the court on Friday in his capacity as a private prosecutor to ensure the matter remains on the roll. Ramaphosa, however, was not obligated to appear in the criminal dock due to the interim interdict he obtained in January, pending the outcome of his legal challenge. The matter, which was recently heard before a full bench, is awaiting judgment.
So, from a practical point of view, my lord, to allow the space for the judgment, we thought if it pleases your lordship, we would ask for a longish postponement so that at the next appearance, of course, we'll also report back to the court and take it from there.
Zuma is attempting to haul Ramaphosa to the criminal court over the alleged disclosure of his health records during his corruption trial in the KZN High Court in Pietermaritzburg. The former president accuses the incumbent of failing to act on the alleged breach, which he argues compromised the NPA and by extension the criminal justice system as a whole. Zuma, through his lawyers, further took the opportunity to address his concerns surrounding his private prosecution bid.
There has been a pattern of, I don't know what to call it, whether it's a go-slow or a sabotage. Every time this matter has to sit here, we have to be struggling for days to have it placed on the roll, which is surprising because it was postponed to a particular date. It might be that it's a matter that we should raise with the registrars rather than your lordship, but it was my instruction is just to raise it, my lord.
The matter returns to the criminal court on 29 August 2023. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now to discuss some of the stories of the week, we're joined by Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast, political analyst. A very good afternoon to you, Professor. Some very interesting political developments occurring this past week. Let's start with Life Esidimeni. This week saw former Gauteng MEC of Finance, Barbara Creasy, appearing before the Life Esidimeni inquest, saying that the health department was not under any pressure to cut costs when it terminated the contract and instead had been underspending its allocated budget. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I think the story of Esidimeni is an expression of a violation of human rights because about 144 people died because they were removed from a particular healthcare and put into a cheaper healthcare due to starvation and people who did not do what they should have done in terms of making sure that proper adherences are done in terms of decision making and procurement. And because of that negligence, people lost their loved ones. So I think the third part is that none of the people who are decision makers have been held accountable, in particular politicians. And I think that is what is hurting many families.
And very striking that that institution should be called Esidimeni. It's quite ironic, isn't it, Professor? And mindful that the former Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura, told the same inquest that when he inquired about the number of patients who had died, he was told that deaths of mental health patients and their facilities were not unusual, it was normal. Is this good coming from a leader?
No, of course, no. I think it's very insulting. It's really hurting, to hear that, especially from someone who should have known better. Also, he cannot be exempted from the lives that were lost there. But I think that leaves much to be desired. I think him and the former MEC of Health, alongside the former MEC of Finance, they have to be held accountable, including other senior officials.
Let's move on to the budget vote that took place in the city of Tshwane on Wednesday. This comes at a time when the battle against cholera is one of the major focus areas for the municipality, as we have seen people die and some hospitalized, some being buried today. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the posture by the EFF was an expression of cholera in Hammanskraal. They were trying to put on hold the passing of the budget so that the municipality can pay attention to what is happening there in terms of the people who have lost their loved ones again, and also some of the gaps which are there in the administration.
And to what end should we say that what is happening, outbreaks of diseases, to some degree must be put at the door of the state government, rather, and that there should be accountability?
Yeah, I mean, accountability is one of the pillars of democracy. So those who are at the helm of power should not turn a blind eye to the failures of their government. I'm talking about now, municipalities. So I think it's quite sad that there is a blame game, that is being played. The DA is blaming the ANC. The ANC is blaming the DA. The EFF is also joining forces with the ANC, blaming the DA. I think it's quite sad because that, doesn't benefit the people on the ground.
Let's move on to another big story emanating from this past week, with President Cyril Ramaphosa finally granting Electricity Minister Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa executive power to do his assigned job. Is this a turn in the right direction, and does it bring hope to South Africans in that the electricity crisis will be finally dealt with?
I've got mixed feelings. I'm not sure if...
Tell me about them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the turn of events is a good thing, because we've been promised a lot of things, that power outages are going to be done away with. But not long ago, we were told that due to the demands of winter, power outages or load shedding might be sitting at stage 8. So the situation is getting worse. So I'm not sure if giving these powers to the Minister of Electricity will be a mitigating factor in terms of reducing power outage.
Why do you think that this only transpired now? Some people saying that it just was a bit late in coming and it is long overdue that these powers be accorded to the electricity minister.
I think the president was hasty. He played the cart before the horse in announcing the appointment of the minister without thinking through the whole idea, because even some senior members of the ANC were in the dark when this announcement was made. That's why there has been this tension amongst these ministers, Minister Gweremantaj, Pravin Gordhan, and also the minister in question. So I don't think that this idea was explored thoroughly. No wonder we have this problem as to who has more powers and so on.
And another story to come from this week, which has dominated news, is that of the book that was written by Prince Mashele on Action SA leader Herman Mashaba. And of course, Mr. Mashele issuing an unreserved apology this week. Let us talk about the reputational harm, potential reputational harm, or is it by now guaranteed around the people involved in the saga?
Asanda, I don't want to be caught in the crossfire in this discussion. Must be very careful.
Yes.
Suffice to say, I think it's not easy to be a political analyst, because you get approached by all sorts of people to do all sorts of things. But
Indeed.
I think we've got a responsibility to the public. I'm not talking about this case. I'm speaking under general, to be, truthful. And to make sure that we don't apply double standards, whereby on the one hand we take a swipe at politicians, but on the other hand we also engage in unethical behavior.
And lastly, let's move back to the courts. The appointment of Madam Justice Mahube Betty Molemela as President of the Supreme Court of Appeal by President Cyril Ramaphosa. What do we know about her?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good thing because there has been a slow pace of transformation in the judiciary. So I think this is a step towards the right direction in terms of the promotion of the transformation, in particular with regard to the element of empowerment of women, given the fact that they've got a history of marginalization. So, she has, I think, a career lifespan of 15 years as a judge, and now she's been appointed, I think, as a president of a Supreme Court of Appeal, I think, in Bloemfontein, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's really a good sign of transformation, and I hope that it will inspire more women in the judiciary.
A good sign indeed. The transformation is a wonderful thing to behold. That's where we're going to leave it now, Prof. Thank you very much for being on the Weekend Review. Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast, political analyst. Let's now look at some of the top stories coming out of Parliament this week. Deputy President Paul Mashatile says the topic of coalition governments is an important conversation which all political parties should be a part of. With the 2024 national and provincial elections now open to be contested by independent candidates, the call for the stabilization of coalition governments has grown louder. Political parties agree that looking at the state of some municipalities run through coalitions, that cannot be the status quo at national level.
Mashatile, when answering questions in the National Assembly on Thursday, agreed all parties should be part of this conversation.
The matter of coalition government is important and requires urgent attention and our collective wisdom. I have responded to similar questions in the National Council of Provinces about coalition governments and a need to convene a national dialogue on coalitions.
Opposition parties will keep a close eye on this process.
I think it's a historic discussion we are having at this moment. For the first time in 29 years, the ruling party is talking about coalitions.
In Wednesday's meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, no decision was taken on whether or not to proceed with a full inquiry into allegations of widespread corruption and criminal cartels at Eskom. Some MPs proposed the establishment of an ad hoc committee. Others were skeptical, opting for Scopa to investigate. This comes as Scopa has been dealing with evidence from stakeholders regarding allegations by former Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter.
I think there's still a number of people that we have to give them an opportunity and to interview in as far as the whole saga is concerned. So it might be premature so far to say this is the route that we must probably take.
We haven't really got to a point where there's sufficient evidence and information to be able to make substantive recommendations in a report to the National Assembly. So I think that we're all in agreement that we need to look further.
Some MPs accused the Director of being an accomplice to the alleged criminality.
It's criminal. 2, he failed in every aspect of leading Eskom. Now he's telling us that certain individuals were stealing out of Eskom. Wasn't he stealing himself? He failed to do what he was supposed to do. Why are we not laying criminal cases against him?
Meanwhile, National Security Advisor to President Cyril Ramaphosa, Dr. Sidney Mufamadi, appeared before Scopa on Friday. The Director alleged he also informed Mufamadi about the names of a senior politician involved in corruption at Eskom.
Was there any name dropping? Yes, there was. I can't remember the various designations that were used. On one hand, I understand Mr. Director talks about high-ranking minister, high-ranking political office bearer. On the other, he talks about a minister. I can at least say, yes, there was a mention of a name or names.
The committee is yet to finalize the list of all people it still wants to hear from. In other news in Parliament this week, Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan said citizens should settle for load shedding until at least December this year. He was tabling his department's budget vote in the National Assembly. Gordhan said the desired energy availability factor, which is set to end load shedding, is on track to be achieved in March 2025.
We now know that we have to, as a population and as the economy, settle for load shedding of a significant order until the end of the year at least. However, nonetheless, determined efforts are being made by government to ensure that the recovery of the generation capacity of Eskom must be complemented by the introduction of new capacity to end load shedding. The Generation Recovery Plan to increase energy availability factor to 70% by the 31st of March 2025 still remains in place.
He also said South African Airways has been saved from liquidation following the sale of the majority stake to a private consortium, the Katso Consortium. Meanwhile, during the Africa Day snap debate held in the National Assembly on Thursday, there were renewed calls for the African Union to intensify efforts to resolve conflict on the continent. MPs hailed the role of South Africa in peacekeeping missions on the continent. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
Health Minister Dr. Joe Phaahla says a makeshift field clinic established at the epicenter of the cholera outbreak in Hammanskraal will remain there until the outbreak is stabilized. Phaahla was speaking fresh from the World Health Assembly in Geneva, having arrived on Friday morning. 22 people have died following the outbreak of the disease.
This place is the epicenter of the cholera outbreak that has claimed the lives of 21 people in Hammanskraal. This, as most of the people infected by cholera are from here. The health department has since erected a makeshift field clinic where testing of the virus happens and they admit severely affected patients. Health Minister says the facility will be here until the situation is stabilized.
We don't know how long because it will depend day by day. There will be an assessment. That's why I said to them, I'll be back here tomorrow. And also, I'm sure even if MEC is not here, some of the senior people from both from my side, also the DG and other staff from our emergency services, but also from the National Department Emergency and Environmental Health, they are also here.
There are reports that the Special Investigating Unit has received proclamation to investigate Edwin Sodi's Blackhead Consulting after reports emerged that he was paid almost 300 million to refurbish the Rooiwal water treatment plant. Residents are appealing for the government to assist in the burial of their loved ones. I'm affected by this outbreak as my sister is one of the deceased due to the water in Hammanskraal. So as I took her to Jubilee Hospital, I realized she was not the only one. He says he's not affected as he drinks borehole water. There's people who have died who will be buried tomorrow, but he's not affected.
I don't think we're affected too much.
The mood is somber and residents are in a panic mode as the body count has risen. Grieving families are expected to start burying their deceased loved ones from this weekend. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Kanana in Hammanskraal.
AmaZulu traditional Prime Minister Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has told Amakhosi attending a meeting in Umhlathuze on the North Coast that he's considering stepping aside from his position as traditional Prime Minister. Buthelezi says recent disagreements with AmaZulu King Misuzulu Kazwelithini have made it difficult for him to continue as Prime Minister. Among some of the concerns raised by Buthelezi is the recent appointment of Inkosi Thanduyise Mzimela as chairperson of the Ingonyama Trust, replacing Justice Jerome Ngwenya. Buthelezi called the meeting with Amakhosi to seek their input on what his next move should be. Speaking to SABC's Ukhozi FM on Wednesday, King Misuzulu dismissed reports of a fallout between him and Prince Buthelezi. The Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, died at her home in Zurich, Switzerland on Wednesday after a long illness at the age of 83. As shown Bryce Pierce reports, the American-born singer-star rose through much difficulty, including an abusive relationship with her late husband, ex-husband Ike Turner, and she became one of the top recording artists of all time.
A representative of the late singer says she died peacefully after a long illness in her home in Kusnacht near Zurich, Switzerland, after an iconic career spanning almost 70 years. The What's Love Got to Do With It and Proud Mary star rose to prominence as the lead singer of the Ike and Tina Turner Revue before breaking away to launch a successful solo career. This was the immediate reaction from the White House.
That is the first time I'm hearing that. That is incredibly sad news. Tina Turner was an icon, a music icon who had many stages and many amazing moments in her career. Very sad to hear the news. I was a huge fan of Tina Turner. As you can see from my reaction, that is the first that I'm hearing of it. And it is a massive loss to the communities that loved her. And certainly to the music industry, and her music will continue to live on. Very sad news. Our hearts go out to her family and her friends on their loss.
Turner, who was famous not just for her music, but the raspy, roaring voice and energy she displayed during performances, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a duo with her ex-husband in 1991 and again as a solo artist in 2021. She counted some 7 Grammy wins in her storied career, including the Record of the Year for What's Love Got to Do With It in 1985. Tina Turner moved to Europe in the late 1980s, beginning a decades-long residency there until her death. She remarried in 2013, joining forces with German music executive Erwin Bach after a 27-year romantic relationship, while also facing family tragedy, losing both her sons, her eldest in 2018 to suicide and her youngest son to cancer as recently as 2022. She is survived by Bach and 2 adopted sons. Tina Turner was 83. Sherwin Briceby's SABC News, New York.
May Tina Turner, the Queen of Rock and Roll, rest in power and rise in eternal glory. That is where we leave it for today. Have a wonderful afternoon further.